Tony Abbott, welcome.
Nice with you, Chris.
Peter Slipper was nurtured by the Coalition, pre-selected 9 times. It's a bit late in the day to be appalled by him now, isn't it?
But we never made him the Speaker of the Parliament, and that's the big difference.
But if you look at this case, the first respondent in this case is the Commonwealth. And the reason for that is there's a 2003 incident which was reported to Tony Nutt, the Chief of Staff for the Prime Minister, about a video that was involving Mr Slipper. Shouldn't it have been nipped in the bud then?
Well, 2 points, Chris. First of all, there was no formal complaint made. And second, the Liberal National Party in Queensland was about to deselect Mr Slipper. I was trying to get Mr Slipper out of the Parliament, and the Prime Minister gave him the biggest job in the Parliament. I think there's a fundamental difference.
Sure, but if we're talking about this case, as I say, the first respondent is the Commonwealth, and one of the things that's being pointed to is a 2003 incident which wasn't handled well by the then government. That's a fair comment, isn't it?
Except there's a world of difference between a allegation and a court process. There was never a formal complaint. Never a formal complaint. If there had been a formal complaint, I'm confident that things would have been done differently.
But surely that formal complaint was made to the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff.
There was never a formal complaint made by someone who claimed to have been subject to sexual harassment.
As you're saying, that was an allegation, but this is also an allegation. It will be tested in court this time, so that's the only difference.
Well, I'm not sure that that's right, because there is a formal court process in train, as well as the sexual harassment issue, the formal court process on sexual harassment. Serious matters of possible criminal misuse of Commonwealth entitlements, I believe, have now been reported to the Australian Federal Police.
And should that matter be cleared up, should then Mr Slipper be allowed to sit in Parliament again while this other allegation is tested?
I think both of these matters need to be resolved before Mr Slipper could once more take the chair, and I think a good precedent established not under the former government but by the current government, Chris, is what happened with the sexual harassment issue at ADFA, the Australian Defence Force Academy. There, the instant news broke of this, the government insisted that the commandant, against whom no personal wrongdoing was alleged, that the commandant stand down to protect the reputation of the institution. He only came back when the sexual harassment matters were fully investigated and had been totally dealt with. So I think that the government has set the standard, and I think that the same standard that the government applied in respect of ADFA should apply here.
So are you prepared to govern?
Well, I believe that there is a better way, and I think that every day, Chris, the Coalition is demonstrating that we are a credible alternative.
But you should have an alternative then. You should have an alternative agenda, and you have said that that government should do for people what they can't do for themselves and no more. So which benefits do you plan to cut?
Well, you're now getting me into the issue that the government was on about last week, Chris. I am not planning to cut benefits, although I've certainly said, and I'm happy to say again, that government has to live within its means. And what we've seen from the current government is example after example of waste, whether it's the $900 cheques dispatched to dead people, the $2.5 billion on combustible roof bats, the $17 billion on overpriced school halls, the $50 billion plus broadband white elephant. The list goes on and on. If the government wasn't spending like a drunken sailor, still borrowing $100 million every single day, obviously we'd be in a better position.
But Joe Hockey has said that the age of entitlement is over. What are we to take the Shadow Treasurer to mean when he says that? Surely it means that entitlements will be cut.
Well, he was making the obvious point that if you look at France, where social spending as a percentage of GDP is double that in Australia, and which is now on the verge of a crisis. I mean, the Eurozone is in a crisis. If you look at France, we've got do whatever we reasonably can to avoid ever getting into that predicament.
But your problem isn't France, your problem is Australia. And if you look at Australia, 33% of the budget, $122 billion, is spent on welfare and on social security. So if you are going to make big cuts, which you say you're going to do, then that's surely a place to start.
Well, what I'm saying, Chris, is that in good time before the next election,
but you said that should be soon.
We will tell people, and if the Prime Minister wants to go to Yarralumla and call an election for 33 days hence, in the course of the campaign, we will detail exactly where we think savings can be made.
But you can't say there should be a change of government now and say that we don't really have a program that we can talk to you about.
Well,
now,
I think there should be an election as soon as possible. That's what I want. I want an election.
And you think there should be budget cuts, quite large ones. So where will the pain come? There will be pain, won't there?
Absolutely right.
So where will it fall?
There is no such thing as a pain-free spending reduction. Going into the last election, we outlined $50 billion worth of savings. We will be at least as good as that going into the next election. You can expect the same level of fiscal discipline and then some going into the next election than we took into the last election. But there was no real discipline in that. In fact, the two accountants who prepared those costings for you, or at least who audited them, were the subject of professional discipline by the Institute of Chartered Accountants. And the Treasury...
Is that the standard we're expected to rest on?
And the Treasury, which has had its own problems with figures, let's face it, Chris, I think they've tried to estimate the mining tax 4 times. They've tried to estimate this year's budget deficit 3 times, and they tell us that they still haven't got it right. The Treasury looked at our figures, and $40 billion of our expenditure reductions were unquestioned by the Treasury.
You say there should be cuts. Will you support the government cuts in the coming budget?
Well, let's wait and see what they do. I've always said that our duty as an opposition is to support good policy and to oppose bad policy, and we'll do that with this budget as we've done before.
Isn't it good policy to support means testing if you really believe that governments should do for people what they can't do for themselves and no more?
Well, it depends exactly what the means testing is. We certainly don't support means tests which the government is putting on in breach of pre-election commitments, such as the means test of the baby bonus and the means test of the private health insurance rebate, both of which were explicitly ruled out before an election.
Why should the government subsidise the health insurance of people who can afford to do it themselves?
Well, the great thing about the private health insurance rebate, Chris, is that it is part of a universal health system, and it also helps to take the pressure off the public hospital system, which is a good thing. The private health insurance rebate is a way of getting more private investment, private money into our health system, and I think that's a very economically rational thing to do.
Now, you've said that you will support the increase in superannuation contributions from 9 to 12%, but you won't take any money from the mining tax. In order to do that, by 2020, you're going to have to find $3.6 billion. Where will you find it?
Well, again, we will detail in good time before the next election precisely where we'll be making savings. But just on the subject of the mining tax is going to actually lose money when you look at the totality of the revenue and the spending associated with it. By abolishing the mining tax and all the measures associated with it, the budget would be about $3 billion better off over the forward estimates.
And again, I'm confused on this because you quite often say the mining tax will be a disaster, but Joe Hockey says that no one will actually pay it. So which of those two things is it?
Well, we say that it's bad in principle, but typically for this government, Chris, it is so botched, the implementation, that they are committed to a whole lot of spending increases that the actual tax itself will never cover.
How will small business cope with the increase of 9 to 12% for superannuation?
Badly.
So why are you supporting it if it's a bad policy?
Because we are following the precedent which has been established before. We don't support these things. We will do our best to stop them, but if they happen, we won't necessarily repeal them.
But you're going to repeal the carbon tax, which you think is bad policy.
Yes.
Why wouldn't you repeal super if you thought that was bad policy?
Because as we're going to follow exactly the same policy in respect of the government's latest superannuation tax, as was followed by the Howard government in respect of previous Labor changes to compulsory superannuation.
Even though you think that it will be bad for small business?
It's effectively an additional 3% payroll tax, which is going to be gradually ratcheted up on business.
Then don't support it.
I don't like this. I don't think this is the right time for it. But there are a lot of bad things that this government is doing, and we can't reverse all of them.